Hello, my name is Chris Phillips, and some of you may remember me from serving as an intern at Epiphany and then at St. Thomas Episcopal Parish. It is such an honor and a privilege to be asked to provide one of these spiritual sustenance messages, because St. Francis as a community has been so important in sustaining me, especially as I progress through my journey of aspiring to become an Episcopal priest. I have an exciting landmark to share, which is that this Saturday I will be ordained a deacon in the church. And then one of the implications of that is that God willing and the people assenting, 6 months from that date, so perhaps sometime in next May, I will be ordained as a priest in the Episcopal Church. So I'm very excited and very thankful for all the support that St. Francis has given me. So for today's spiritual sustenance, I wanted to take a look at some of the lesser feasts that we commemorated over the past week. And I focused specifically on the feast commemorating Alfred the Great, King of Wessex. And I wanted to speak briefly about the gospel reading that is provided for King Alfred's feast day. And it comes from the Gospel of Luke. And I'll just share it with you briefly and then share a few brief thoughts about it. Jesus said, "No good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit. For each tree is known by its own fruit. Figs are not gathered from thorns, nor are grapes picked from a bramble bush. The good person out of the good treasure of the heart produces good, and the evil person out of evil treasure produces evil. For it is out of the abundance of the heart that the mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house, who dug deeply and laid the foundation on rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against the house but could not shake it, because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of the house." So I like this reading because it does a couple of things. One, it begins by challenging me and forcing me to look a little bit deeper. I don't know about you, but the first time I saw no good tree bears bad fruit, nor again does a bad tree bear good fruit, I found that to be challenging to my notions of the promise of a Christian life, or of any life well lived. That is the promise of redemption and reform. We are not simply good or bad and bearing good or bad fruit. We are given by God the gift of free will, of agency, the ability to change, to notice and respond to the needs of our own needs, but also, importantly, the needs of others. So if this statement by Jesus isn't a statement that we are somehow unchangeable and prisoners of some sort of past decision, something that we cannot break out of, then what is Jesus trying to say here? And I think what is important is that we are known by what we do and by what we don't do. Action is important. I think of the confession that we would say together, this public confession to God and to our neighbors. Most merciful God, we confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed, by what we have done and by what we have left undone. Action is important. The importance of action, I think, comes up again in the second part of this reading. Jesus provides an example. 2 men build 2 houses, and the first one works to build a deep and solid foundation for his house, and the other builds the house directly on the ground. What's interesting about this example is that these 2 houses would probably have existed and functioned exactly the same, except for when a flood came, except for when they were challenged. And the house with a deep foundation is able to meet the floodwaters and to stave them off, whereas the house built with no foundation is swept away and ruined by the rising waters. We probably don't need any more reminders that life often has its own share of floods. The year 2020 alone seems to have been full of them. The way that disease has swept across this country, the way that divisiveness has swept across our conversations. These are real challenges, and we as a community are mourning real losses. And so what are we called to do? And what can we rely on? I think this example of a foundation and the flood is helpful because it shows us answers to both of those questions. In the face of a flood, in the face of an onslaught, we can rely on our foundation. And that foundation is our faith, and in the body of Christ, the community that is assembled around us. There are many people around us that we can rely on, even though it might not seem like it in the present moment. There are many who would love to hear your voice, would love to hear from you. And they, and the love that they hold for you, can be your foundation. We're also called to action. We're called to dig a foundation for ourselves, but also to protect others. It is Christ's call that we notice, that we are there and present for our neighbors. And how do we act in this time to be present for them? How can we serve as a foundation for them? Again, sometimes the prescriptions seem very simple. It can be the act of reaching out, of noticing and being present to members of our community and people at large. Christ is at work in all of us at all times, and Christ calls us to act. So over these next few days, especially with a tumultuous election ahead of us, remember to act. Remember to share that good treasure that is in your heart. God bless you and have an amazing week.